Hello everyone, Santu here with Let's Make a Game Astral Collision. And we don't really have a whole lot to look at in this screen today because a lot of what I've been doing has been over here. This is actually quite new. So a lot of my focus this past week has been on more planning angles of things. We'll go over this in a moment. I actually want to head over to weapon planning. I will, however, before I go into this in much detail, bring up that here's the world progression thing that I mentioned last time. I'd forgotten to have it loaded up and ready to go. But if I go over here, and I like paint.net for certain things. There's a couple of different photo editing drawing programs that I like. I like Affinity by Serif for more, I don't know, image manipulation type stuff, whereas I like this for more simple tasks or pixel art, things like that. But I'm getting away from myself here. So you can kind of see some of the progression that I was thinking, and I'll probably tweak this up more. And the general idea was that things were going to be kind of rough level ranges of like, okay, I expect you to start here, and then these areas are kind of equivalent. And then you kind of move in here, it gets a little harder. Excuse me, so on and so forth. And I haven't done a whole lot with this lately, but that was kind of the general idea. So I figured I might as well bring that up. Anyway, I've been working on more weapons and more things like that. So I think, yes, crossbow is new. What I've settled on with this is it scales with level, I think it is, N18. Yeah. N18 is level. So at level 1, it just does the 80 to 110. At level 99, the crossbow you can now see is 160 to 218. So if I go back to level 1, again, crossbow over here. Whoop. Crossbow right here. When I go back to level 1, it drops down. Also, the flintlocks critical multiplier scales with level now. I don't remember if that was the case before or not. And you'll notice a lot of stuff down here has been figured out. Before I just had the katana. My dex is super high. The katana scales with, I don't know, what is C33? Oh, yeah, this one. It's just this guy. So this one is 70% of this stat. And this stat is a bunch of math that you can see here. This is working off of strength and dex and some random other stuff. But I figured out what I'm doing with the chainsaw. So the chainsaw is best to describe if I actually go over into the thing. So we'll do that in a bit. There's a bunch of weapons to look at there. But the basic idea is that the chainsaw damage doesn't scale with anything. It's just a set high value. But that it increases your strength but decreases your dex as additional effects on it. So if you have... that music seems kind of loud. I'm going to lower it a little bit. Anyway, so if you have higher strength, you'll be able to do certain attacks more effectively, is kind of the idea. And then the scepter is now, it's going to use a similar strategy to the claws, I think. So yeah, the claws use the min and max of your dexterity and strength to determine their damage. The scepter is going to use, because the scepter, keep in mind, is... Okay, so let's step back a little bit. There are 4 types of caster weapons, as it were, or weapons that are more explicitly magical in nature. The staff, the scepter, the magic missile, and the tome. Tome, not to be confused with tomb. Those are easily confused words. But the staff and the tome are two-handed. The scepter and the magic missile are one-handed. The staff and magic missile are single element. So, in other words, they are one of the 4 standard ones of fire, earth, wind, and water. I just wanted to make sure wind and air are terms that I'll use interchangeably at times, and I will catch myself up with them, so I wanted to make sure I got those correctly. But anyway, magic missile and staff both derive off of one weapon, and so they're kind of are one of those base 4 elements, so they're kind of complementary pair. And the tome, where the staff is two-handed, the magic missile is one-handed, to be clear. Whereas the scepter and the tome are based off of one of the combinatorial elements. So actually, if I go back to the overview, we can see these right here. Fire plus earth is metal, fire plus wind is lightning, fire plus water is light, water plus earth is darkness, water plus wind is ice, and wind plus earth is life. So the scepter and the tome are based off of these combinatorial elements. So the scepter will pick whichever the two elements are for the damage type it deals. For example, if it deals light damage, then it will take the minimum of your fire and water and make that the minimum damage, and the maximum of your fire and water and make that the maximum damage. So that's how that one works. Back to a weapon page. The scepter also, so the one-handed weapons of scepter and magic missile have 10% chances to inflict the relevant condition for whatever. I'm going to raise the music a little bit. The relevant condition for whatever their damage type is. So in the case of, say, light damage, it's 10% chance to inflict blind. If it was ice, it would be, what did I call the ice one? I don't remember offhand. I would have to look at things, but that's why we have reference information. So anyway, the scepter, fairly straightforward, minimum, maximum of whatever the two elements that go into it are. Magic missile, of course, doesn't have two elements. You'll notice the damage values here are looking fairly low. What these basically do is N14 in this case is fire, and N18 right here is level. So magic missile actually scales with your level and your stats. So this was kind of so I should explain after I talk a little bit about how the tome works. So the tome is very straightforward. It works off of the same basic principle as the staff. The staff, as a reminder, just uses the relevant stat and then 2 times the relevant stat. So in this case, if it's earth damage, it will be your earth stat and then 2 times your earth stat for its damage. The tome, because it draws off of 2 elements, uses the average of the 2 elements for your low and the sum for the high. The average, of course, is half the sum. This works out to be the same basic idea as the staff. Now, a staff for your strongest element is probably going to be more effective than a tome for your 2 strongest elements, just because the average, the worst of your second strongest element is going to decrease that number slightly. The sort of compensation for that. Now, staff has better critical hits, but isn't as likely to critical hit and is 2-handed. The tome has a worse critical hit, but has a chance to reflect magic. So that gives some advantages to it there. Music's gotten loud again. I love classical music, but it does have a tendency to have a very large dynamic range, which will make some of that stuff happen. So I was in kind of a spot where, okay, what do I do with the magic missile? I don't want the magic missile to work, like it can't work the same way as the scepter, obviously. And the tome, should be clear, is going to be more powerful than a scepter. But a scepter means that you can use an offhand, which may be valuable to you. But the staff has a very specific way. So it needs to kind of... The magic missile can't be more powerful than the staff, because you are sacrificing your offhand slot in order to use the staff. So there has to be more power inherent in the staff. So the magic missile has to be weaker than the staff, but it also can't... Like, it needs to fit in a spot where it's somewhat analogous to the scepter, and things like that. So I don't want it to just be like some other, like, say, I didn't want it to be like, oh, it's the stat and then 1.5 times the stat or something like that. I want to do something a little bit more with it. So what I ended up making it is that it also scales with your level. So once you get up to 99, you'll see it goes up higher. The low end is the relevant stat and the level divided by 2. And the upper end is just the sum of level. And so it works very similar to the tome, actually. But it's just your level and the relevant stat. So, for example, since this is scaling with fire, if I had 200 fire, that'd get up to 299. You'll notice that if I also go earth at 200, that this is stronger than the magic missile, even at the same stat values at level 99, where this is going up to 300, or it has an average of 300. This is an average of 225. This thing's maximum value is less than the average for the staff. But, you know, it gives you access to offhand. It attacks faster. Its critical hit is also worse than the staff. The staff has twice as powerful of a critical hit as well. So when staff does get critical hits, it does reasonably well with them. So I feel like this probably gives it a nice middle ground spot in terms of how effective it is. Now, scimitars, the next weapon to discuss. You'll notice the scimitar value has gone up when I raised fire. I don't know which one that would be. It should be both fire and earth, actually. So scimitars I made really complicated. So the basic idea going into the scimitar is that it would function as a weapon that is imbued with an element, I guess, is the term that I'm using for it, because enchantment means something else. So I'm wanting to be very careful with my terms to create distinct language, so that way the player can have something to latch onto vocabulary-wise. So scimitars are imbued with an element. They work differently than other weapons. Let's actually go into the game to explain this. That's going to be clearer. So I want weapons to be able to have other element types, other than, say, by default, let's just use a sword for an example. So the sword has a default way of working. It has this complicated formula that I probably put too much time into figuring out, but it was fun. And it deals slashing damage. It gives you a 5% chance to counterattack and plus 10 attack speed. That's a sword on its face. Now, I want to be able to deal fire damage, but I also don't want to draw from your fire stat. This is just an example. We'll look at an implemented example down here. We have... Where did I stick it? All of the stuff is in whatever order things came to my brain. And here, Fiery Dragon Sword. Just straight taken from Guild Wars 1. It's a reference, homage, whatever you want to call it. This deals the exact same amount of damage as a sword, because I don't want this to be strictly better than a sword. And if it scaled off of your fire damage, it would be strictly better than the regular sword in terms of how much damage it deals, to be clear. Where this comes in at being better is because it has a better counterattack rate. So if you remember, the sword here was 5%. The Fiery Dragon Sword is 15%. It deals fire damage, which may or may not be preferable, but it also increases your fire stat by 100, and as well as an additional 5%, and gives you a skill. So this is kind of how I wanted to approach weapons. Is I didn't want, like, the same type of weapon. I want to, generally speaking, deal the same amount of damage. Now, that's not necessarily going to be the case with chainsaws. Chainsaws are, like, there's going to be weapons that are kind of a little bit of an exception to that. I still need to figure out how I'm handling some of the guns, particularly the shotgun and the rifle are things that I need to figure out how I'm handling. But what I basically want to do, and you can see here with the Logger's Chainsaw that I have these multipliers added in, but I want the same class of weapon to deal roughly the same damage, generally speaking. And because of that, I don't want most weapons to draw from the relevant element stat when they deal element damage. So I don't want this Fiery Dragon Sword to draw from your fire stat, because that would then make it inherently have a higher damage rating than just any other, like most standard swords. And so because I want to keep that consistency in terms of a sword is a sword is a sword to some extent, because that means that there's a bit more competition between different types of weapons and things like that. And it plays into some of the options that I want to open, because one of the problems I have with a lot of RPGs is when you go through the game, you keep getting stronger and stronger weapons that are outclassing previous ones, so you don't really have a choice of what weapon to wield. You just use whichever one is strongest. There's a little bit more nuance than that in a lot of RPGs, but for the most part, it's just a raw numbers game. Whatever weapon you have that has the highest damage numbers. Tales of Symphonia has a good example of this. There's a weapon that you get from a side quest that is extremely strong, not counting another weapon from a side quest that draws strength from the number of enemies you've defeated, which can become extremely powerful. But there's a weapon for the main character that you get through a side quest that is the strongest weapon in the game, barring the conditional one I just mentioned. There's a plot weapon that you get towards the end of the game that just doesn't have as high of stats, so there's not really a reason to wield it most of the time, as far as I'm aware, if you get the stronger one. So I want it to be where you have options among the weapons that you collect, where each one is an option, and it's not like, oh, well, this one's damage is straight inferior, so I have no reason to ever use it. Granted, once you get a fiery dragon sword, you're probably not going to want to use a steel sword, but like, and I'm okay with the baseline examples of most weapons being like, yeah, I could use that, but like this is better because it provides me more stuff than the baseline. That's fine. That's cool. I'm happy for that. But for example, the Royal Kendron sword gives you access to the parry stance skill. The parry stance skill might be more valuable to you than a bunch of additional fire, which will raise your maximum TP, and the Dragon's Breath skill, and slightly higher counterattack rate. Like, there's an argument to be made that these weapons are competing on roughly a similar axis, not a completely disheveled one, because, say, one has a lot more damage because it's drawing from your fire attack. All of that builds up to scimitars, because scimitars, so like fire dragon swords, like when these deal elemental, I want them to add to your elemental stat rather than draw from your elemental stat, is kind of where to finish that line of logic. So scimitars, I want them to actually draw from your relevant elemental stats. So that's where we get into some complicated math. I'm going to go back to the other thing in just a moment to cover it, but the old scimitar is a unique version of the scimitar. This is going to be kind of a thing that you can find and work with. It basically is a scimitar that has none of the imbued element stuff to it. So this is a fire-imbued scimitar. It draws from your fire stat. And so its damage is going to increase with your fire stat, whereas the old scimitar doesn't have any imbue. So it will always... it just draws from your physical stats. Again, we'll go over the math in just a moment. But what that means is one of the things I want you to be able to do is collect old scimitars from fallen enemies, take them to a special crafter that allows you to re-imbue them with an element and to get these imbued versions. I thought it was a really good way of kind of creating a baseline scimitar that's not quite the full thing. And these ones with asterisks next to them, by the way, just mean I haven't changed the stuff to properly take the relevant element into account. So, for example, this one is properly drawing from fire and properly giving you the rage condition chance, whereas this one is also drawing from fire and giving you the rage % chance when it should be drawing from water and giving you confusion chance, I believe. So the stars just mean I need to go fix those. So going back into here, we will discuss some of the math here. So scimitar on the low end, so there's a lot of decimals going on here, but basically this is... Actually, let's do the high end first, because that's going to be easier to understand. I don't have as much weird decimals. So this is your strength and your dexterity. Actually, that's the other way around. Yeah. Yeah. Wait. Dexterity. I might have this backwards. N12 is strength. Oh, no, I have it the correct way. So it takes... Sorry, I was getting confused by the +2 and the times. So it takes your strength plus 2 times your dexterity and then divided by 3. So what this is basically doing is it's kind of taking an average between your strength and your dexterity, where your strength has 1 part and your dexterity has 2 parts, so it favors dexterity. So it makes your dexterity a bit stronger. But this is basically kind of like an average of your strength and dexterity, where dexterity is entered in twice, plus the average of the relevant elements. So, for example, because this is a metal scimitar, it is your fire and your earth, and then it takes the average of that. If it's just one element, then it just adds that element. So that's kind of how that goes. And then a 10% chance to inflict the relevant condition for the damage type, etc. The low end is using the same math, but it takes half the amount. So this is half as strong as the upper end, kind of. It's not entirely accurate. So right here, 0.25 is 3/4. So up here we have divided by 3. Over here, the way that this kind of works out is, and I have to kind of remember the math that was going into this. But there was, yeah, so that was divided by 3, divided by 2, I think, which then caused stuff to flip. I'm trying to remember the exact. math that was going on here. But basically, the way that I figured out was, oh, that kind of gets to where I want it to be. And I forget what the exact process was there for getting to that. This goes from divided by 2 to times 0.345. 0.345 was some like 70s. It was basically kind of like taking, I forget exactly how I was doing this division, but basically it was decreasing at a certain amount. I think it might have been that this is like a 70th or something along those lines. Yeah, okay, this is 75%. This is 75% of that. Is roughly how that worked out. Let's 29 over 40. Yeah, that's not quite, but it's close enough. So, yeah, what was happening here was this was supposed to be like 75%, because the initial value that I'd had for scimitars was 60 and 80. And so that's 3/4. So I think I was just doing something with that. And so the 3/4 here, when you divide by 3/4, it's multiplying by, or not dividing, or when you multiply it by 3/4, by 3/4, the 2 here becomes like an 1/8, so it's then like 3/8, I think. 3/8. Yeah, and there's some other stuff going on. Because that's 2. I don't remember exactly. But then this is how it worked out when I was thinking through it. So I'm not going to belabor the point any further than this. But if there's a single element like fire imbued right here, you can see that this is just divided by 2 right here, and not times the 3.45. So there's math that I'd figured out when I was working through it. I don't remember the exact process anymore. It's fine. I trust my past self. So that's some of what I was doing with prepping some of this stuff. Now, there's some other things that I was thinking about with like legendary weapons that you might find in a place and references. So that's where we get something like the Chainsaw of Doom. The Chainsaw of Doom is, of course, a reference to the chainsaw from the game Doom. So it's a legendary weapon that steals health from your enemies, deals a butt ton of damage, supercharges your TP generation rate, but comes with a down, and it like doubles your attack stat, which doesn't increase the attack of the weapon, but rather increases your strength. So this is twice strength, but you get 1/10 of your dexterity, so you super lose dexterity. This will make certain stats really, certain skills a lot more powerful. It also just gets rid of all of your MP. You don't have any MP while you're wielding this weapon. So it's it has some consequences of using it, but this seemed like an interesting way of introducing an idea, and so or like this was something that seemed like a cool idea to me. I'm planning on putting it in the what's the name of that place? I've got too many names and stuff floating around. I'm not going to remember all of them, but let's see, Sindire. It's in some of the tunnels in Sindire is where I'm going to kind of put some of that, and I'll have a little bit of references and stuff. I'll probably make a shotgun as well that references Doom. Stuff I grew up with. I think it's fun to kind of include homages and stuff like that, and it seemed like a cool idea. Include stuff that makes you excited. That's a key to getting stuff done. So the Fiery Dragon Sword, again, reference to Guild Wars, but I was also kind of thinking through things, and something that I really like as an idea, and I need to work out some of the details, but is in the Adventurers Guild, there being sort of tiers of Adventurer, and so there are certain merchants that you can use at certain tiers. So at just baseline, oh, you're an Adventurer, congratulations, you get access to these things. Once you become, higher tier, you get access to these things, and at some point you get access to Fiery Dragon Swords. I should actually mention what this skill does. So the skill, Dragon's Breath, does fire. It's an attack that deals an additional fire damage, has a much higher chance to critical hit, and has a chance to inflict the Burning Gaze enchantment, which causes health degen and also inflicts. Here, actually, we can go over the states. to reference it for reference. So Burning Gaze gives you HP degen, MP degen, TP regen, so it gains you more TP. It also makes it so that way you basically are guaranteed to inflict it when you attack somebody. So that's kind of the idea of Burning Gaze. It sets everything on fire and spreads around the entire team. So whether or not you want to use that skill is perhaps a little questionable, but here we are. The fact that it uses your fire stat, of course, that stat is dramatically boosted by the relevant stat. So that's something I want to do, is figure out how to get you levels, though. Or ranks up in the guild. That's something that I'm still trying to figure out. I could just do it on aggregate party level and kind of weave some story into the beginning. That seems a bit questionable. I was thinking about, are there different ways that I would want to do a bounty system? Is there some sort of drop that I want to have? Enemies generate, and I'm not entirely sure what I want to do. I've mentally thought about a couple of different approaches. Part of it is that this game is not, or this engine is not really designed to have additional currencies. It's possible to add them in. I'm not going to say otherwise, but adding something in addition to gold has overhead of making interfaces to work with it and that sort of stuff. I could therefore make gold some sort of thing that works into it, but then it doesn't make sense using it as a currency anywhere else. If I made it an item, I'd have to make enemies specifically drop that item. I may still make it an item and have you specify the bounty drop in tags, and that might be the approach that I use for it. The issue, of course, is item cap. I can go and edit the item cap, though, and that's something that I might do anyway. Or actually, something that I might do is make it so that way I can specify a cap for individual items. So that might be a good approach. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and come over to this and just add a note. I don't know. Up here at the top. Let's just add a to-do. Add a meta tag for setting caps for item stacks individually. There we go. That's nice. That's probably a good way of approaching it. To do, add a bounty tag for enemies, so I can have them drop X of a bounty item. There we go. And then you'll be able to do something with those in order to be able to advance that. So that's something that I've been thinking about as well, is having that levels. And that seems like a cool additional little thing to have, just fleshing stuff out here and there. I still need to figure out what some of these things are, but I kind of want to leave some of these question mark items until I figure out what would be good additional things to have as well. Okay, enough looking at that. I'm going to hit save compulsively. So we opened up, if you may remember, on other equipment. So this is the other thing that I did. I want to figure out what I'm doing with my other equipment. So if we go back here, because it's useful to discuss, I have types. It's types, not system. There are several different categories of equipment. We have weapon, obviously, and we've discussed that at extreme length in this episode. Hopefully that all made sense. But we also have offhand, head, body, hands, feet, and accessory. And we have several different types of things that go into these other lots. Armor is just the generic term for equipment that is not weapons. That's just how RPG Maker calls things. So we have metal shields, wooden shields, hats, standard helmet, full helmet, pointed hat, circlet, tunic, body armor, plate mail, robe, cape, shoes, boots, etc. I'm not going to go through all of those here because I trust in your ability to read. So I'm going to go ahead and actually jump over to here. It's based on these icons. So there's a bunch of different ones here. So if I kind of just scroll through these quickly, that's a metal shield, that's a wooden shield, that's a standard issue hat, a standard helmet, a full helmet, pointed hat, circlet, tunic, body armor, because I needed that to be something, and body armor makes a lot of sense because I have some more modern characters. Steel plate, plate mail, robe, cape, shoes, boots, gloves, gauntlets, Bracelets are also hand armor. Rings. There's a couple different types of rings here. There's necklaces, which I have several that I've designed. This is a focus. Focus is basically supposed to be a caster offhand. I'll discuss that more later. Combs, which is another sort of headpiece. Ribbon, I don't entirely know what I'm doing with ribbons, but it's an icon they gave me. Sweatband, so this is just like a headband. Goggles, a jacket, a gambeson. Gambeson is a very important type of armor to include, in my opinion, because I watched Shadowversity, and he talks a lot about how important gambeson is, how common of an armor it is, and that sort of thing. And then they gave me a dress, so we've got a dress. Here we are. So I just went through all of these, and I kind of recorded down what effects I'd kind of given them on that initial, like, let's make stuff pass, and started thinking about stuff critically. There's a lot of information here, so let's try to cover it fairly quickly. I took all of the things and arranged them by type, by category. So we have our accessories, which are capes, rings, and necklaces. And then our arm armor, our chest armor, foot armor, head armor, and offhands. And I've been kind of thinking through what they are. And in the process of doing this, I realized that I have a lot of recurring elements. So, for example, increasing stats, such as maximum MP, maximum HP, and then individual stats, such as, let's see, down here. Yeah, the focus, for example, is giving you more fire, water, earth, and wind. Those are individual stats. So I did some thinking about stats and how I want to handle increasing them, because I have, again, I want things to generally be flat in terms of the power of your equipment. I want a lot of your strength to be from your character leveling up, from more options, and from the skills that you gain access to. So I don't want, say, plate mail from over here to be like, oh, this plate mail is like, I don't know, 150 more defense than this plate mail. Or in the case of this game, oh, I get this plate mail that's plus 150 HP, this plate mail that's plus 1,000. Obviously, the one with plus 1,000 is better. I don't want those sort of like strict better thans in the design of the game. So I had to kind of figure out how am I going to handle boosts to stats, such as maximum HP, so on and so forth. And what I decided is that I like doing a combination of a additive, a flat value, because here's the thing. If I have a flat value, it matters a lot in the early game, but the later you get in the game, the more it kind of shrinks relative to the stats that you get through level growth. So as your character levels, their stats go up. So basically, additive values matter more the lower the initial value is. So in other words, the greater the percentage of your stats. So if you're getting plus 150 HP when you have 500 HP, that is, I mean, whatever, we can just do it over here. 150 divided by 500, that's 30%. If you have 5,000 HP, that's 3%. It's not as big of an improvement. So what I wanted to do, I don't need this cell. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to do kind of a combination of percentage increases and additive increases. The problem with doing just a percentage increase is that it matters a lot when you have a lot of the stat, but it doesn't do much when you have very little of the stat. So if I have, like, say, I mean, I've got stuff here. So if I have a base value of a stat of 10, and I just multiply it by, this is increasing it by 15%. Without the additive, it goes up to 2, right? It goes up by 2. That's not very impressive. Even though this is supposed to be a fairly strong boost, it goes up by 30, obviously, at 200. It's going up by the same percentage, roughly, but it is a dramatically decreased impact. And so if I wanted to do a small boost, like let's say I wanted something that was like, 5%, like this whole part here was for calculating out math for these things here. We'll talk about these in a moment. Right now I'm just going through my thought process. So if I had a 5% increase, well, that doesn't do very much here. It doesn't do a whole lot here either, but does a little bit more, relatively speaking. So I wanted a combination of like additive, which would be strong early, and make strong equipment look strong early, as well as multipliers that would keep strong equipment strong late. So this equipment is kind of weird. It's better early in the game and kind of drops off a bit as you get later and later because the percentage is not very high. which I believe I had this at, whoops, that would be very aggressive, 115. So up here we see this is increased by 37 over the base. That's what this is the increase. This was for doing some comparative stuff. You can ignore it. So yeah, if my base value is 15, then plus 6 times 1.15. Now keep in mind, this gets applied after this, so this is always going to benefit from that. But I wanted to have a combination of those. So, and I've got some notes about some of this thought over here in order to kind of process some of that. So this is kind of where I settled. And I'm just using some terms. This concept is borrowed from Guild Wars. Survivor is an insignia that gives you a small amount of HP. Vitae is a rune that gives you a slightly more amount than most Survivor insignias will give you. Not important details. But it's worse than most of the other runes. So there's Minor, Major, and Superior, which are the rune strengths. And then Radiant and Attunement, Minor, Major, Superior, is just following a similar model of borrowing terms from Guild Wars. I did the same thing here, but there's no equivalent for these for standard stats, so I just used bonus and boost just to keep the terminology clear over here when I'm doing stuff. So these are then a bunch of values that I decided on. You'll notice that HP right here does not have a raw additive. That's because HP starts at around 500, so it just gets more of a bonus from percentage multipliers than some of the other stats do. But you can see that superior strength is quite a strong boost. And to be clear, also, these are guidelines, not set in stone. So I just wanted to give myself something that I could use in reference over here and something to work with to give myself a rough idea of, okay, if I want to increase the stat, how am I going to do it? Because I'm going to use a combination of a plus and a multiplier. What approach do I want to use? And so on and so forth. So that was kind of planning all that stuff out over here. So here's what is my example of this currently doing, what category is it, what equipment type is it, and then what do I want this to be generally speaking. So cape, the cape that's in right now decreases fire damage and water damage. And I like the idea of capes are just like you slap on a cape and it just offers resistance to some elemental damage. And there's probably going to be ones that are against a single element and stronger and multiple elements and weaker, stuff like that. I haven't fully thought through all of that, but rings, right now, they increase a magical stat by 20%. So, for example, you get a ruby ring and increases your fire damage by 20%, or your fire stat by 20%. I'm thinking that I like that current functionality. Obviously, those are better later in the game. They don't follow this sort of guideline. I might adjust them to follow this sort of guideline and make them like a superior. But there's also something very clean about, plus 20% to a stat. That's fairly clean. I like the idea of another set of rings that's like, this is plus 20%. Like it's a metal. It's the metal boosting ring. It's plus 20% to both fire and earth. But to compensate, it's minus 20% to water and wind. That's something that I'll probably implement. So right now, necklaces provide condition immunity. That's a nice set of things to have. But I don't have a ton of different accessories items, as you may have noticed. Just the 3. Again, I'm using the icons built into the game. This is not necessarily a decision I would have made inherently. So I will probably make additional functionality in necklaces if I'm finding I want other things to do than grant condition immunity, boost elemental stats, or decrease elemental damage, which is likely going to be the case, and I don't believe every class can even use all of the different accessory types. Let's see. These can use... Yeah, for example, right here, the ninja can use rings and necklaces, but I don't see cape on this list, so they can't use capes. Necklaces, I think, can be used by most everyone. I think rings and necklaces... Well, Sage can use everything. That's not a good example. But I think necklace can be used by everyone. They have capes, but they don't have rings here. On the druid, I'm not seeing ring. I'm seeing necklace, cape. But I don't see ring. So there's some stuff there where I might want to have necklaces have a couple of different things that I'm putting in there, depending upon what I want to do. So right now I have gloves do several different things, depending upon which type of armor you're using. I've decided that I want gloves to give you a boost to action time, and then they can increase your physical, your strength and dex. Whereas gauntlets increase your critical hit rate rather than the number of actions. They're heavy, they let you hit harder, but they don't let you move as much. Is the rough idea, I guess my brain was going for there. But they can also boost strength and dex. Whereas bracelets, I want to boost your MP. Now, see, MP minor is referencing this over here. So it will use the 6 and the 110, at least, especially for the default bracelets. And then they also give a zealous effect. Zealous effect means that your attacks restore energy. Again, borrowing terminology from Guild Wars, because Guild Wars has massively influenced how my designer brain thinks. So then we go through a bunch of different chest armors. So tunics will increase both evasion stats, give you a bit of HP, a little bit of MP, but not a whole lot in either of those. Body armor decreases physical damage and gives you a little bit of HP. Really, so that's kind of the second closest to low. Really, body armor is much more about decreasing physical damage. It's not as good against elemental damage. Or magical damage from magical attacks versus damage from physical attacks. So, for example, if I hit you with a fiery dragon sword while you're wearing body armor, its damage will be decreased. But if I hit you with fireball, it won't. Is just kind of an example, because that's a spell versus physical attack. That is dictated, for those who are unfamiliar, and I might as well go into this, right here. No, that's not right there. Right here, hit type. Certain hit is neither. It always hits. It doesn't care about accuracy or any of those values. Physical attack and magical attack care about those things. One cares about physical evasion and counterattack. The other cares about magical evasion and spell reflection. And then they also care about the physical damage multiplier or the magic damage multiplier, depending upon whether it's physical or magical. So that's what that's all about. Right here, I like the idea of plate mail, just in general, decreasing slashing, striking, and piercing damage that you take, and give you a bunch of HP. And then also potentially reducing the damage from single specific elements for elemental damage. So these are physical damage types. This is anything that is a physical damage type, whether or not it's physical or physical attack or magical spell. If it deals slashing, striking, or piercing damage, will be decreased by this. There's a bit of a difference here. The interesting thing about this is this will reduce the healing you take if the healing is of one of these types. That's something that we found with capes that are already on characters. So, just pointing out that detail. Robes are for mages, so they decrease the magical damage you receive, similar to how this decreases the physical damage you receive. They give you a very small amount of HP. They do give you a decent amount of MP. So robes help there. Jacket, right now, the way that this base jacket works is it decreases your chances of being debuffed in any way. So it decreases it by 10%. It reduces it to 90%. And it gives you a bit of maximum HP and a bit of maximum MP. I was trying to figure out what could be the differences with this, and what I kind of settled on in terms of differences between different jackets is that all of them give you basically the same sort of like, oh, decreased chance of being debuffed, cool. But that any two stats, HP, maximum HP, maximum MP, or strength, dexterity, fire, wind, water, etc., earth. Figured I might as well finish that, etc. It can pick two. It can boost two of those. That's how I'm going to roll with that. Gambison reduces slashing and striking damage a bit. Gives you a decent amount of HP and can reduce damage from a single element, similar to how this can reduce damage from a single element. The default one that I have, of course, decreases damage from ice. And then dress, I like the idea that it boosts your the amount of healing you receive. And then it also gives you a little bit of additional HP and MP. These are not very good for protecting yourself, but they do make you easier to heal because I needed something, and that's what I got. Regular shoes allow you to boost evasion and or your attack speed. Boots give you HP and can boost your attack speed, but not your evasion. Remember, this is armor. So this does not boost your HP. This does. And that boots themselves can also reduce floor damage. Again, they're armor. Floor damage is just something where the certain tiles are marked as dealing damage to you. If you step in them, you take damage. The ninja, for example, is immune to floor damage. There's things like spikes, lava, stuff like that, deals floor damage. I still need to figure out a bunch of these things in here. I think in general, hats are going to be kind of flavor-based, but I still need to go through and process a bunch of these. Combs I felt are fine as is. They're not used by a whole lot of characters anyway. They just give a 10% chance to inflict a specific condition on your attack. So, for example, there's a comb that gives you a 10% chance to inflict poison, another one that gives you a 10% chance to inflict fear, so on and so forth. And then circlets decrease your MP costs. I figured in order to be able to have more, I figure that there can be downsides to compensate for having more MP decrease. So the default one is just like, oh, your MP is decreased by 10%, 90% on your MP costs. Shaves off a little bit, gives you a few more casts. Your downside is that you can't use some other equipment in your head slot, which you may have access to. But that if I have ones that decrease that cost by more, they can do other things, like increasing the amount of damage you take, decreasing how much you get healed by, decreasing the rate at which you charge DP, things like that are other additional options. So I think that covers most of the stuff that I've been going through. This has taken longer than I expected, but I had a lot of stuff I want to talk about that is a lot more designery, which means I'm not just showing you pretty pictures of buildings and stuff. Like I said, I've not done anything with a map, really. I have technically... Oh, goodness, where's the one? Added a couple of tester NPCs for testing weapons and armor descriptions to make sure that those are working properly, but that's boring, so we're not going to look at that right now. We'll you know what? Never mind. Let's go ahead and wrap up the episode on looking at these for no reason other than they're there. Maybe we'll even find something broken like we did last time. But it seems like a good place to end this episode. So, yes, as it loads. Thank you. So this guy allows me to look at all of these. Now, I've added weapons that don't show up here. But I can go through and see, oh, these things are showing up. Like, this silver scepter would be absolutely terrible for Sir Lionel to wield. Not that he can, but it would be terrible. I'm going to need to tweak a bunch of costs and stuff, too, and all sorts of things. Open Club, looks pretty decent on him. The shotgun is real good. Logger's chainsaw is super good. Firebolt is mildly more impressive on Sir Lionel, but then the Silver Scepter, 8 to 16 light damage is just not as good as what this is doing, which is 11 to 22 fire damage, based on his level mostly. I think he might have 16 fire, and he's like level 6. So, and I haven't gone through all of these yet, obviously. Also, you don't want to give a tome to your physical attackers for some random reason. And then the old scimitar is just based on his attack stats. It's not particularly good. In general, I don't expect anyone to wield the old scimitar. It's designed for a loot drop that you can then salvage, sell, or convert into an imbued version, which is going to be superior, just always superior. The old scimitar only takes the physical part. It doesn't have any of the imbued part, so it's pretty weak. This doesn't matter for the most part yet, because I haven't really done anything with these guys, but this is where this stuff is. I may want to change up some of the displays over here, because these numbers aren't going to be particularly helpful for comparing stuff the way that they currently work. Yeah. You can see there's all of these in here. So that way, when I start working on them, I can look at their descriptions and stuff in game to make sure that they're working properly. So anyway, that's going to go ahead and wrap stuff up for today. So thank you very much for watching. And any questions, go ahead and leave them below. And until next time, everyone, take care and goodbye.